Rotten Secrets on a Balcony Garden. How I brought my dead soil back to life. A year ago, if you had told me I'd be feeding banana peels to worms on my third-floor apartment balcony, I would have laughed. Back then, I didn't know a thing about gardening. But I wanted to grow something, anything. I imagined pots of basil swaying in the breeze, cherry tomatoes ripening under the sun, maybe even some lettuce for my sandwiches. So I bought a few pots, filled them with soil from the store, planted seeds, watered carefully, and waited, and waited. And nothing. The basil barely sprouted. The lettuce grew an inch, then wilted and died. The tomato plant turned yellow within 2 weeks. The soil dried out fast. No matter how much I watered, it felt like the life had been sucked out of the pots. I was disappointed, but not ready to give up. When the balcony soil died. One morning, I poked my fingers into the potting mix and noticed how compact and lifeless it felt. It was dry and pale. I watered it the day before, but it was already dusty again. Something wasn't right. I went down an internet rabbit hole of soil health, pH, drainage, organic matter, and worm castings. That's when I read something that stuck with me. If there are no worms, your soil isn't alive. Well, I didn't have worms. Heck, I wasn't even sure they could survive in balcony pots. But suddenly, that became the missing piece. The accidental breakthrough. A week later, I was cleaning the fridge and found a forgotten banana, brown, mushy, way past its prime. I started walking it to the trash, then stopped. What if? I took a trowel and dug a small hole in the corner of one of my bigger pots. I buried the banana, covered it with soil, watered a little, and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, when I planted another round of lettuce in that same pot, the soil felt different, softer, cooler, richer. I dug a bit deeper to see what happened to the banana, and that's when I saw it. A worm. A real wriggly earthworm, right there in my balcony pot. I nearly screamed in surprise. I hadn't added worms. I hadn't bought compost. I just buried a banana. Trash turns to treasure. Encouraged, I started experimenting with more scraps. Rotten strawberries? Into the soil. Wilted spinach? Buried it. Coffee grounds? Yes, please. Eggshells? Crushed and sprinkled. Instead of throwing kitchen waste into the trash, I created a scrap spot in each of my larger pots. I dug a small hole, 4 to 6 inches deep, dropped the scraps in, and covered it up. It became a routine. Every couple of days, I fed my soil. Within weeks, the change was dramatic. The soil stayed moist longer. My plants started growing faster. Leaves turned deep green, roots grew deeper. And the best part? When I gently dug around, I kept finding more and more worms. Somehow, in a concrete jungle, I had built a living ecosystem on my balcony. The worm bait system for small spaces. I started calling it my worm bait system. Here's how I do it. 1. Choose one large pot, ideally 12 to 14 inches deep. 2. Dig a small hole on one edge away from plant roots. 3. Add soft, decomposable scraps, fruit peels, wilted greens, coffee grounds. 4. Cover tightly with soil. 5. Water lightly. 6. Repeat every 5 to 7 days, rotating the spot within the same pot or using a different pot. Over time, these buried scraps broke down into rich humus, and if there were worms in the original soil, or even in nearby planters, they came. If not, I added a handful of red wigglers, bought online for less than $10. They thrive. Why it works, even on a balcony. Balcony gardens tend to struggle with dry, fast-draining soil, limited space for composting, lack of natural biodiversity. But this simple system fixes all three. Moisture retention. Scraps break down and hold water better than bare potting mix. Nutrient cycling. Decomposition creates a steady flow of natural fertilizer. Living soil. Worms aerate and enrich the soil, preventing compaction. Plus, it requires 0 extra space. No compost bins, no turning piles, no odor. Everything happens right inside the pot. Mistakes I made, so you don't have to. I didn't get it perfect at first. Here's what I learned the hard way. Don't bury too much at once. I once overloaded a pot with watermelon rind and ended up with fruit flies. Lesson learned. Chop things up. The smaller the scraps, the faster they break down. A whole apple takes weeks. Apple peels? Just days. Don't skip the soil cover. Scraps need to be completely buried to avoid pests. Rotate feeding spots. Don't keep adding to the same hole. Let each area rest and break down. The magic of tiny ecosystems. By midsummer, my balcony was bursting with green. Tomatoes climbing up a trellis, basil that I had to keep cutting back, even carrots growing in fabric pots. All from a system that started with one rotten banana. I realized something. Even in the smallest spaces, nature finds a way, if we just give it the conditions to thrive. Worms don't care if they're underground in a forest or 10 feet above a parking lot. If the food's there, if the moisture's right, they'll come. And they'll work for you, quietly, consistently, beautifully. Your balcony can be a life zone too. If you live in an apartment, if you only have a small patio, if you think composting sounds messy or smelly, this is your sign. You don't need a backyard. You don't need a compost bin. You don't need to wait months for soil to improve. You just need a few scraps and the courage to bury them. Because buried inside every piece of rotten fruit or wilted veggie is a promise. A promise that life can grow from decay. A promise that your soil can come back, even on a balcony. Try it this week. Pick your biggest pot. Dig a small hole, drop in some scraps, water, walk away, then come back in a few weeks. And don't be surprised when you meet your first worm. That wriggle? That's the sign your garden is alive, even in the sky.